In the GED science test, life science questions focus on understanding living organisms and biological systems. This lesson will cover the most testable and essential concepts related to cells, genetics, ecosystems, and human biology, all presented in a way that's simple, exam-relevant, and easy to understand for beginners. Let's begin with cells, the basic units of life. To start with, the cell is considered the basic unit of life. This means that everything living, whether it's a tiny microorganism or a complex human being, is made up of one or more cells. When we look closer, we find that there are two main types of cells. First, we have prokaryotic cells. These are simple in structure and do not contain a nucleus. A good example of this type is bacteria. Second, we have eukaryotic cells. These are more complex and contain a nucleus. You'll find these in both plant and animal organisms. So, in short, prokaryotes are simpler with no nucleus, while eukaryotes are more advanced with a clearly defined nucleus. Key cell organelles to know. Now that you understand what a cell is, let's explore some of its most important parts, also known as organelles, and what each one does. The nucleus acts as the control center of the cell. It holds the cell's DNA and directs all of its activities. The mitochondria are often called the powerhouse of the cell because they produce the energy the cell needs to function. The cell membrane serves as a protective barrier. It controls what substances can enter or leave the cell, helping maintain balance. The cytoplasm is the jelly-like fluid that fills the inside of the cell and holds all the organelles in place. Ribosomes are responsible for making proteins, which are essential for the cell's structure and activity. In addition, plant cells have two special parts that animal cells do not. Chloroplasts, found only in plant cells, are where photosynthesis happens. They help the plant convert sunlight into energy. The cell wall, also found only in plant cells, provides added structure and support, helping the plant maintain its shape. GED tip: expect questions asking you to identify organelle functions or compare plant versus animal cells. Now that you know what cells are and how they work, let's take a closer look at what's inside the nucleus, specifically the material that carries your genetic information. What is DNA? To begin with, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the molecule that holds the instructions for how every part of your body is built and maintained. You'll find DNA inside the nucleus of eukaryotic cells. Structurally, it's shaped like a twisted ladder, known as a double helix. This shape allows it to store and pass on a massive amount of information in a very compact form. Next, let's talk about genes. A gene is simply a segment of DNA that codes for a specific trait, like eye color, height, or blood type. You inherit genes in pairs, one from each parent. The combination you receive determines the traits that show up in you. In other words, genes are like blueprints, and traits are the finished features you can see or measure. When it comes to how traits are expressed, genes come in different forms called alleles. Some alleles are dominant, while others are recessive. Let's break it down. A dominant allele is represented by a capital letter, such as B. It only takes one copy of a dominant allele for that trait to show up. A recessive allele is shown with a lowercase letter, like B. For a recessive trait to appear, you must have two copies, one from each parent, so BB. Here are two simple examples. If someone has the gene combination BB, the dominant trait will show up. But if someone has BB, the recessive trait is what you'll see. GED tip: you may be asked to predict traits using punnett squares or identify which traits are dominant/recessive. Let's now explore how living things, especially plants and animals, create and use energy. This brings us to two key biological processes: photosynthesis and cellular respiration. First, we'll start with photosynthesis, which happens only in plants. The process can be summarized like this. Carbon dioxide plus water plus sunlight produces glucose and oxygen. In simple terms, plants absorb carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil. Then, using sunlight as energy, they transform these ingredients into glucose, a type of sugar, and release oxygen as a byproduct. This is how plants create their own food, and it's also how they produce the oxygen we breathe. Next, let's look at cellular respiration, which takes place in both plants and animals. This process works in the opposite way. Glucose plus oxygen produces carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP. In this case, your cells take the glucose from the food you eat and combine it with oxygen. This reaction creates carbon dioxide and water, but more importantly, it generates energy your body uses to function. That energy is called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. GED tip. For the GED test, be prepared to match each description with the correct process. You might also be asked whether a process happens in plants, animals, or both. Focus on knowing what goes into each process, what comes out, and who uses it. Now let's shift our focus to the big picture: how living things interact within the environment. This brings us into the study of ecology, which includes ecosystems, food chains, and the flow of energy. To start, let's review some key vocabulary you'll need to know. An ecosystem is a community that includes both living things, like animals and plants, and non-living things, like air, water, and sunlight. A producer is an organism, such as a plant, that makes its own food using sunlight. A consumer is an organism, such as an animal, that eats other organisms to get energy. A decomposer, such as fungi or bacteria, breaks down dead plants and animals, returning nutrients to the environment. A food chain or food web is a diagram that shows how energy flows from one organism to another in an ecosystem. Let's walk through how energy moves in a basic food chain. It begins with the sun, which provides energy to plants. These plants, or producers, are eaten by herbivores, which are animals that only eat plants. Then, carnivores eat the herbivores. Finally, decomposers break down the remains of dead organisms and recycle nutrients back into the ecosystem. Each step along this path is called a trophic level, and the amount of energy decreases as you move up each level. GED tip. On the GED test, you might be shown a diagram of a food chain or a food web. Be ready to identify what role an organism plays, such as producer, consumer, or decomposer. You may also be asked to predict what would happen if one species were removed. Understanding how energy flows through an ecosystem will help you answer these questions confidently. Now let's explore how the human body functions. While there are many systems in the body, the GED focuses on a few key ones. Let's break them down one by one. First, the circulatory system includes the heart, blood, and blood vessels. Its main job is to transport oxygen and nutrients throughout the body. Think of it as the delivery system that keeps everything running smoothly. Next is the nervous system, which includes the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. This system controls the body's responses and internal communication. It's responsible for your senses, reactions, and coordination. Then we have the digestive system, which includes the mouth, stomach, and intestines. Its function is to break down food and absorb nutrients so your body can use them for energy and repair. Finally, the respiratory system includes the lungs and trachea. Its role is to bring in oxygen and remove carbon dioxide from the body. Breathing is just the beginning. This system powers the exchange of gases needed for survival. GED tip. On the GED test, you might be asked to match a body part to its system or identify which system is affected by a specific condition. Focus on understanding the main parts and purposes of each system so you can quickly recognize them in questions. In this GED Life Science lesson, we covered everything you need to know for the test: the structure and function of cells, how DNA and heredity work, how energy flows through ecosystems, and the essential body systems. Focus on understanding functions, identifying roles, and interpreting diagrams. These are common GED science question formats. This foundational knowledge not only helps on the exam, but also strengthens your understanding of the living world around you.